Welcome to Everything is Changing. In each episode, we focus on circular economy, ecosystem restoration, energy transformation, sustainable mobility, and water resources. I am Ahmetcan Uzlaşık. Perspective is everything, and everything is changing. My guest today is Martin Simonow, Acting Head of Policy and Advocacy at Cool Earth, a climate charity working with rainforest communities across the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and New Guinea. Martin focuses on the stories, science, and justice issues shaping these forests, and on the essential role of indigenous peoples who have protected them for generations. This episode was recorded in collaboration with the Dear Forest podcast from the WWF Belgium youth team, co-hosted with Patsimo Ditlong. It builds on the recent positive news article, The Bold Model Stopping Deforestation in its Tracks, which explores Cool Earth's approach of providing direct, no-strings-attached cash support to rainforest communities. We discuss where deforestation is happening right now, why community-led action often outperforms traditional conservation models, and how direct cash transfers help families protect their lands and adapt to climate impacts. We also touch on climate diplomacy, growing lobbying at global summits, and why rainforests matter to all of us, no matter where we live.
Can you maybe start off by telling us your name, where you work, and what you do for work?
Yes, so my name is Martin Simonow. I'm currently the acting head of policy and advocacy for a climate charity called Cool Earth. And Cool Earth is based in the United Kingdom, but we work across the rainforest, well, mainly in the big three rainforests of this world, so the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and the forests of New Guinea. Cool Earth, as I just said, is a climate charity. We've, always seen the rainforest as playing a major role in trying to mitigate the climate crisis. And within the world of rainforests, there are probably a lot of different strategies and solutions to look at, but we've exclusively worked with indigenous peoples and local communities who've lived in these places for thousands of years and have protected them, have stewarded them, and are now facing quite difficult threats to their territories. And we've always looked at supporting these communities.
For listeners who may not be familiar with the global picture, where is deforestation happening most intensely right now, Martin, and which regions is Cool Earth working in to address it exactly?
As I said, deforestation happens across the tropics, across the rainforest world. Where we work, so let's say we don't necessarily work right in the Brazilian Amazon, which is probably what gets most attention, but we work in the Peruvian Amazon, where deforestation is still a major issue. We work in Cameroon, which is part of the Congo Basin, where deforestation is also a major issue, and obviously in Papua New Guinea, where deforestation is also a major issue. So I don't think that making a ranking of where it's worse probably wouldn't help, because it's an issue everywhere. And all of the communities we work with across these countries and across these regions face, loggers, face extractive industries, face also sometimes, government policies which are not necessarily in favor of protecting their territories, their lands, but also their rights as communities.
Yeah, okay. Definitely, an interesting thing to hear. I think people always indeed focus on the big places, especially with COP just having happened in Brazil. What makes Cool Earth's model of giving direct, no-strings-attached cash to rainforest communities more effective than traditional conservation or offset-based approaches?
The Cool Earth story is an interesting one, because it begins sort of in 2008 when a Welsh anthropologist puts us in touch with an indigenous communities in the Peruvian Amazon. And at this, back in the sort of mid-2000s, they are faced by, they're regularly confronted by loggers who want to purchase their trees, purchase their land. And Cool Earth has just launched, and obviously as people who are based in the United Kingdom, protecting a rainforest is quite an ambition, a feat we're probably not able to conceive or comprehend. And after discussions and kind of, building a relationship with this community, we figure out that the best way to do it is by providing direct, unconditional cash to these communities. At this stage, just a kind of a grant, a communal grant, that the community then decides how best they invest it. Now, that model still exists today. It's evolved in different ways as well. We've got different delivery mechanism across the world, and that's normal because, you know, times change, communities change, realities change, and then you have to adapt to that. But the basis, the providing direct and unconditional cash payments to these people, still exists. What makes it unique is, unlike offsets or unlike more traditional ways of supporting these communities, is that we've tried to remove as many intermediaries as possible. So we want to go pretty much from the donor to the people at the front line of deforestation or the climate crisis. And we want to give full control, full agency, full autonomy to these people who, you know, will make the most out of these cash payments, because they know what to do. They know what their priorities are. They know what their needs are. These needs and priorities might change from one day to the other. An organization or a donor country, you know, a few thousand miles away from the actual place where this is happening, might not be able to be as flexible or might not be able to pivot as quickly as these people might want to address a lot of the threats that they face. And so this is essentially the rationale we have. It's, if these people are able to control all of the resources we provide to them, and that's called out for any other, you know, entity that we can think of, then not only is it quite a quick way of getting support to the front line, but it's also quite cheap because there's a lot of middlemen that you can get rid of, and is very efficient because these people, for, as I said, thousands of years, have been protecting the rainforest. And not only have they left us with a huge heritage, but they're also the roadmap we need to follow to protect the rainforest now, in 5 years, and well into the future.
And how do you ensure that direct cash support strengthens communities over the long term without perhaps creating, again, long-term dependency? Because these loggers will come again, right? As we saw in the article, they came to Saipas village in 1990s and then...
I mean, that's always a risk. And I completely get your question. Now, I think there's various ways of looking at it. Cash, all right, if we just take cash, it goes a very long way. So say a family or even an individual receives a regular cash payments for a certain amount of time. As I said, you know, we're not a huge NGO. We don't have unlimited funding, unfortunately. And for cash to have like a huge impact across a community, normally that happens when you know that everybody within that community is benefiting, which sometimes is quite hard to do, you know, because that requires a lot of cash or a lot of money. Now, but going back to the cash, the sustainability of cash, there's, you know, if a family or a household decides to invest in their child's education or in setting up a small business, obviously the cash payment we provide happens on one certain day or, you know, across certain months. But a child going through its education, even to secondary education or tertiary education, that is simply a result of that, you know, smaller cash payment we gave a few years back. And that has lasting consequences, lasting benefits for this family or for that particular individual. Similar with, so that's one delivery mechanism, as in directly to people or directly to households. We've also done cash payments directly to communities. And at this stage, it's, okay, so communities looking at much bigger infrastructure development investments. So let's build a health post in the community. And that has, you know, far-reaching or long-term consequences for the development of that community. There's another mechanism we've used, which is particularly in Peru, where indigenous communities are very strong governance processes, and a lot of them are represented by what they call Indigenous Federation. And with them, we've also given large payments, which are totally unconditional, no strings attached. And when they've used this payment to look at wildfires and how best to change, you know, their practices on a large scale, because for a long time it's been slash and burn, which has been a very useful practice for subsistence farming, for example, for food security. You know, if you want to open up a small subsistence garden, you just slash and burn, and that's very quick for you to be able to provide for your family in terms of growing food. But they're seeing that because climate change has huge impacts on temperatures and rainfall in the rainforest, they're probably not able to continue with that practice. So a payment like that to the Indigenous Federation allows them to look at, okay, what new practices can we adopt? What new technology can we use to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change? And again, that has long-term consequences on how this plays out at the level of that region. So if you look at it that way, it is sustainable. I totally understand the dependency aspect of it. But then there's another bit, which we talked about at the beginning, was all of our cash programs could be seen as simply us giving cash. It's actually far more complex and far more nuanced than that, because we work to co-create all of these programs with Indigenous peoples and their leaders or their representatives, including even the participants who don't necessarily have a leadership role in the community. But all of them contribute to designing these processes, mapping, the sort of governance structures, and making sure that all of what we do goes through whatever the local structure is, and then also deciding on what the objectives are, because at the end of the day, it's for them, it's not for anyone else. And that ability to really embed a cash program within those structures or within these ideologies, these local ideologies, allows us to be extremely effective, but also extremely sustainable. And this is how we've conceived all of these cash programs.
I think the multifaceted approach is definitely something that I hadn't even considered. I think I simplified it, and I think most people, if they were to read the article, would probably simplify it, but it sounds a lot more complex and a lot more interesting to have like different ways for people to access the cash. But I am interested to know about any challenges that you face commonly when trying to engage with communities, like suspicion from locals, or like the bureaucracy of like government level approval processes. And you also spoke a little bit about intermediaries, so I'm not sure how happy they were to be cut out of the middle. So I'm definitely interested to know more.
Sure. I mean, I think the first major challenge is working in the rainforest. You will have read SEPA's story in Positive News. SEPA is a community member in Papua New Guinea who we work with, and even just to be able to be interviewed, had to trek for 3 hours, had to somehow get signal from the top of a mountain to be made aware that they had to be interviewed. So all of that complexity also exists when you're trying to develop a cash program. And then there's also, each community being different from one another, even neighboring communities have their own challenges and complexities and nuances, and you have to somehow factor that into the design of these projects. When it comes to intermediaries, I mean, generally these intermediaries are not necessarily people, generally other NGOs or other kind of, development or climate sector entities that take a share of like the overall budget or the overall funding than there is. So it's not like these people are lacking any, they're not living on a day-to-day basis trying to make ends meet. So it's just us trying to really streamline the process from, funding existing, because there's a lot of funding around, from multiple sources, whether it's corporates, whether it's trusts and foundations, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's governments. We just need to make sure that the money that exists is delivered in the most efficient and the quickest way to these people who are battling things like deforestation or climate impacts. And so that leads me to not necessarily the kind of local challenges or the challenges of working in the rainforest, but working with donors. I mean, a lot of our donors, we're very lucky in the sense that we're able to do that because a lot of them give us unrestricted cash, and then we're able to pivot very quickly or change the way we want to deliver cash or resources to these communities very quickly. But as you will probably have found from just by reading what happened at COP, for example, in the last couple of weeks, rich countries or even, more wealthier entities still struggle to release the cash that's needed to support these people as they face these issues. And sometimes we kind of, if we're looking to grow and scale, these are the challenges we'll probably be faced with, because there's a lot of kind of trying to influence these these entities with a lot more money, but also there's a lot of reporting requirements, and suddenly, you spend your time just trying to lobby, trying to report, forgetting that, the impact is happening on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another challenge, is how do you make donors understand that the level, or the kind of the difficulty with this is that we need to get these funds fast, straight to the forest floor, with very little bureaucracy, cut the middleman out, and just make it as efficient as possible. And to be honest, we've done it at our scale, at our level. So we have a blueprint. We just need to work together now with people across the board to deliver this at a much, much bigger scale.
Well, I had so many questions, but you almost answered them all. So what I wonder is, I feel like since I have been living in both in Istanbul and Brussels, for example, I feel like people in many parts of the world don't think enough about the deforestation happening in rainforests. As an NGO, how do you communicate this to them from a communication perspective? For example, in the UK or in Europe, what kind of digital campaigns we do?
All right, the first thing here, you could go to the CoolEarth website, coolEarth.org, and then for all of December, we're running quite a big campaign, mainly looking at Papua New Guinea, based on SAPA's story, in fact. And all of the donations are doubled for the month of December. And there's going to be a lot of content on why forests in Papua New Guinea, why forests in Cameroon, why forests in Peru or Colombia are important for life on Earth. But very simply, it's actually not that simple, but all right, let's say it's simple. Rainforests stabilize the climate. Rainforests have an impact on rainfall. So temperatures, water cycles, food systems, all of these are absolutely necessary if anyone, regardless of where they live on this planet, want to survive or live a kind of dignified, thriving life. Without the rainforest, all of this goes. And so that creates quite a apocalyptical, if that's a word, sorry, world, apocalyptic. I think that's the word. Apocalyptic world. So at this stage, given how far we're in the climate crisis, there's so much we need to do, but protecting the rainforest is by far one of the top priority solutions at this stage. Like phasing out fossil fuels, but ending deforestation is let's say one of the top two at this stage. And you will see it at COP, despite the fact that it was only mentioned once in the final text, deforestation, and despite the fact that phasing out fossil fuel wasn't mentioned. This is still the two priorities we need to focus on. And even if you don't have rainforests in the UK or Turkey or wherever you are in the world, when the forest disappears, you will feel those consequences, possibly not now, but certainly in 5 to 10 years.
I'm originally from Botswana, and we're semi-arid savanna, but the rainforest region is getting closer and closer. So we're a region that doesn't have yellow fever, but if you go further up north in a couple of years, half the country will be a risk zone for yellow fever already. So it's a little bit already happening, I think.
Exactly, and the health impact. So you're right. Sorry, just to for cutting you, but the health impact of a changing climate, which has been enhanced by deforestation across the world, something we really need to look at, and we need to anticipate that, regardless of where we are in the world as well. There are huge risks, and the pandemic a few years back is another example of this.
I would like to know, with global drivers like agricultural expansion and international trade still pushing deforestation, do you think that community level interventions will scale fast enough, or do we also need a systemic shift alongside this work? So lots of people talk about, changing the way that our economy is structured, for instance. Do you think that those kind of have something to do with
Absolutely.
Or
We've been talking about cash payments and how they're quick and efficient and cheap to run, but they're clearly not the silver bullet solution. If we did just that, we'd still be facing huge issues. But even if you just look at deforestation, it's a clear market failure. at this stage, we know it's worth more cut down than it is standing. And that's because of the ecosystem, the economic system we've built. So it clearly needs to change at this point. We've also seen that, and I guess related to cash to some extent, is that the people that, or the organizations, the businesses that exploit the forest have created their own wealth by exploiting resources and ultimately people. And to some extent, going back to the sustainability of cash, it goes beyond sustainability. It kind of goes towards fairness and justice. It's like all that wealth creation through the exploitation of resources, through because of the economic system, needs to somehow be redistributed so that the people at the front line of these crises are duly kind of, there's an element of reparation to it. There's an element of not necessarily rewarding these people, but also demonstrating that they are the solutions, that they've always been the solution. And whatever ideology they have, whatever practices they have, and their own economic system to some extent, their own knowledge systems needs to be valued and incorporated in how we create the world of tomorrow. I mean, the economic system we're all relying on at this stage is clearly unsustainable. And that's probably the unsustainable part, rather than these people receiving cash and having to fight quite difficult conditions with very little resources. So there's a lot to do in terms of the community-led stuff. There's a lot of, as you're both in Brussels, lobbying, members of the European Parliament. And you will probably have seen that the EU deforestation regulation has been delayed by another year, and that's problematic. And we should do a lot more to make sure that it does come into play much sooner, that a fault in the IT system shouldn't be the thing that's, delaying this, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these actions are obviously incredibly useful to eventually begin to conceive a world where there is no deforestation, including, the food system. I mean, the food system is probably the number one priority, is how do we readdress it? I mean, how do we reconceive it so it doesn't drive deforestation across the tropics and across the world?
Martin, you talked about COP earlier. I want to ask something about the future of the climate diplomacy. And if I'm not mistaken, you also studied international relations, so that makes sense. How do you see the future of multilateralism and climate diplomacy in this sense? Because, for example, in the COP, US didn't send any high-level envoys this year.
I studied international relations a long time ago, but I'll try my best. Well, I don't know what was best, but no, you're right. It's COP. The outcome of COP is clearly disappointing. Obviously, I mean, it's better than no text at all. So there is, still a tiny element of climate diplomacy and multilateralism working, where in the end, the consensus in the 196 countries are able to produce something. But you're right. I mean, I guess we look at climate diplomacy in a very formal and official way. So if you look at negotiators and delegates and ministers who are officially there to negotiate a legally binding commitment so that we can somehow address this crisis, you're probably looking at it with a lot of pessimism and going like, how are we going to move forward with this? Now, the rest of COP is also full of people with big ideas, lots of people looking at different solutions, looking at how to bring those solutions together and influence those policymakers and decision makers. Now, that's not often reflected very well in the final text, but these ideas still matter. And I think that if we still believe that there is enough of voices, possibly not in the negotiations room at this stage, but still trying to influence those people who will come to make the biggest decisions, then there is still a bit of hope in terms of climate diplomacy. I think climate diplomacy is not just what happens behind closed doors, even though that's probably what people want to hear. There's also a lot surrounding those closed door rooms. And I mean, it's something we see every year. We're always disappointed. We always come out of a COP with mixed feelings. But the process still exists. It's complicated because of the way it works, where every country needs to to back this before we can publish anything. Maybe there's needs to be a change in how this works. I don't know. This is not my area of expertise, but what I think what you need to always remember is that there's so much happening, even at COP and outside of those 2 weeks every year as well. That kind of tells you, okay, there is something to look forward to. Is it going fast enough? Clearly not, but there is plenty of potential and plenty of material to work with to be able to address this crisis. I mean, we've got the cash, we've got the technology, we've got the strategies.
Yeah, I think COP has gotten more and more difficult to watch every year. Yeah, I don't know. I just like every year get the feeling, okay, it's coming up. And then you're like getting ready to watch, and then you're watching, and each time you're like, why am I doing this again? Like, yeah, it's honestly like just gotten a bit like more and more ridiculous. And I think it's also like a super stark contrast to like what it was in the beginning, because my mom went to one of the first COPs like over 20 years ago, like, yeah, a while ago. And so like, I think when I hear her talking about it and like what it's become now, kind of the media circus around it, it's become like completely different. And I think it's also because we're living in the age of like social media where everything is like constantly available, and we're able to watch everything and analyze every single movement and every single like statement down to like the exact wording that each country wants. Because I think the perception is that there's a lot of like corporations lobbying, but there's also a lot of like oil and gas countries that are also like lobbying, and the US wasn't there, as Ahmed Khan said, but there's a lot of other oil and gas countries that are completely capable, as we saw, that are completely capable on their own of like making sure that the agenda that they want is pushed. So yeah, here's to hoping that the next ones will be a little better, I guess. I don't know. All we can do is like keep watching, keep hoping. Like that's I think condition.
Yeah, exactly. What I read is that in the past COPs hosted like way less people. Like when we look at the recent COPs, for example, COP 28 in Dubai hosted 80,000 people. This year, COP 13 Belém 60,000, and Baku was extremely crowded as well. Next year in Turkey, it will probably going to be huge as well, since it is very close to different continents. This year, for instance, like there were at least 1,600 lobbyists from fossil fuel sector. So that's, these numbers tell us something.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, just a little difficult to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And at the same time, I mean, just to go on this topic, it's difficult because when it has attention, media attention or global attention, this is also when activism or protests are able to also have the attention. So you saw at this COP a lot of indigenous protests. You saw a lot of actions being coordinated around the venue in the town, and that also works when a lot of people are watching it, across social media, across more traditional media, etc., etc. So it's a difficult one. It's like, do you go back to the more sensible, more humble setting and you really try and work with those negotiators, or do you keep having these much bigger forums which can become quite confusing and scary, but at the same time, it's also, the eyes of the world will be watching, and so that a powerful message will probably have a lot of impact on many people around the world.
So if there is one thing that you hope somebody listening to this conversation today could take away, if nothing else, what would it be?
Support indigenous peoples. If you want to have an impact on deforestation, a positive impact on ending deforestation, I mean, if there's one thing you need to do is support indigenous peoples and how their practices, their ideologies, their knowledge, etc., etc. There are a lot of organizations that do that. Providing direct and conditional cash is by far a very efficient way of doing it. Go to our website. There's great coalitions as well that we work in. One called Cash for Conservation, which is a movement of, forward-thinking organizations looking at precisely how cash might become a mainstream instrument when you're looking at conservation of ecosystems across the world. And in And to an extent as well, if you're looking at, if you're struggling to find whether you want to support climate causes, environmental causes, or, human rights causes, supporting indigenous peoples kind of hit all three. so it's probably by far one of the biggest things you could do at this stage.
That was our conversation with Martin Simonov from Cool Earth. His message is clear. If we want to stop deforestation and protect the world's rainforests, we must support indigenous peoples and local communities, trust their knowledge, and ensure resources reach them directly, quickly, fairly, and without unnecessary intermediaries. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow Everything is Changing on your favorite podcast platform, leave us a review, and share it with someone who cares about forests, climate justice, or community-driven solutions. Perspective is everything, and everything is changing.